Welcome, everyone, to the Brandon Adams podcast. This is episode 34. I'm with Cory Mikesell. Cory, nice to have you. Welcome from Stockholm.
Thanks for having me. I picked we picked the one sunny day to sit inside and do a podcast. So it was perfect.
For background, the way I met Cory is I started prepping for the Phil Galfond Challenge. I had a Run It Once membership, so I was watching a lot of videos. I quickly gathered that Richard Grieco and Cory Mikesell were the best coaches. I particularly like Cory's approach, and then I learned that he had written a book called Heads Up PLO, The Definitive Guide. I thought, this is the man I need to talk with. So I got in touch with you by email. We quickly started a coaching program. I read the book a couple times, and here we are.
It was good timing on my part too, I guess, releasing it when I did.
So the book is very expensive. It's $2,500. I take
it's actually $1,600.
Okay, $1,600, and then sometimes maybe if one is buying a coaching package, it could be discounted or something. But it's an unbelievable effort, like an unbelievable book. Changed my poker game and poker life. It's similar to Michael Acevedo's book from a couple years ago in being very revolutionary. But I really just have to commend the effort. How long did this book take you?
A lot of the work probably stems all the way back to like 2017, where I was doing a lot of this research for myself. And then I met a guy playing 5100 on Stars. He wrote the intro to the book. His screen name was Tom Zahn. I'm sorry if I butchered that. He puts an emphasis. I don't know if it's Tom's on or Thompson, but I apologize because I know I'm butchering it. And then we started working together. I wouldn't say that I was necessarily a coach because he's already like an extremely high level player. So I would say it's more like in chess, they would have a second, which is kind of like a trainer or somebody who helps the player prepare for like a big match. So I was kind of fulfilling that role and making a lot of content and analysis for him. And that's like 2018, 2019. And then just recently, he decided that he wanted to retire and move on to other things. So then we had this conversation of, okay, now this information, we've built it up. Now that he's not using it anymore, we'll turn it into a book. So the actual writing probably took about a year on and off, but the material has been accumulating for, I think up to like 4 years.
Well, we had a script, and I'm going to throw away the script for a little bit because I have some important poker questions that I need to ask you. I was debating this question with a friend of mine who's very sharp. We had the debate, can you overinvest in coaching for an area like poker or in a different realm if one were very interested, let's just say in some detailed element of sports betting or something like that, or in, let's say one had committed themselves to a trading career or a hedge fund career or, I don't know, computer programming or something like, can you overinvest in coaching? And we were coming at this from the standpoint of, I invested a decent bit in coaching for this PLO challenge. And his stance was, you can't really overinvest in coaching. Do you have views on the return on investment for coaching?
Well, the return on investment for good coaching is enormous, and like good coaching is just massively undervalued. What good coaching is pretty hard to assess, and like that can be where the problem stems. I could see that if somebody basically didn't want to think about the game, whatever game that is, it could be the game of investing or the game of sports betting, not just poker. If you didn't want to think about that, and basically you outsourced all of your brain work to the coach who would just like feed you information, I would think that that's going to give you a lower return on investment, and actually in some ways could hurt you if you're not internalizing the information well and you're like misapplying it, or the coach isn't good at sensing when there's a disconnect, because there's a big kind of burden on the coach to look into the way that you're thinking and try to build a model of your brain in their brain and say, okay, here's where the disconnect is. So I think if you're willing to do the work and you can assess that somebody else is not only skilled in whatever you're trying to pursue, but is making a lot of like learning materials and things that are easily digestible, then probably the return on investment, when it comes to something like poker or investing, there's just no way that I could charge enough that you wouldn't still have an enormous ROI. For instance, I've had students that go from, I think one of my students was like -4 BB per 100 against regs playing heads up. And then after a coaching package, he's like +12 at like 5'10". So that if he continues on that path, it's going to pay for itself many times. I took lessons with Andrew Seidman at the very beginning of my career. He wrote
Beluga Whale was his name back in the day. Yeah.
Yes. I started at 5 cent, 10 cent on the American sites, and maybe a year and a half later, I'm beating 510. I don't remember what I paid for him, but it must have paid for itself 30 times over, because he really knew how to give you what you needed at the right time. Whereas I think there's a lot of people in poker, if say level 5 is thinking about game theory, they're at level 2 and they just want to skip 3 and 4. And then they end up just like ruining their game actually. But if the coach gives it to you incrementally, then I really think it would be hard to overinvest. Yeah, I mean, maybe if you're paying $500 an hour and you're only playing 5 cent, 10 cent, that's probably too much. But if you're already at mid stakes, then yeah, it's going to pay for itself. Yeah, probably in a month or so.
I've found that studying PLO has had huge spillover benefits to my understanding of poker in general. Like studying heads up PLO in depth has made me understand some subtle aspects of play that have spillover benefits for my no limit game and stuff like that. So reading like Michael Acevedo's book was transformative, and studying a lot of no limit Munker solutions was very important for me. But then like studying heads up PLO, it makes me understand certain concepts of position and bet sizing in a deeper way. And now, as you know, as many listeners know, I'm in the middle of this challenge with Galfond, which Galfon and I haven't talked about the meta game. Like we haven't talked much about how the match is going. But I do think he was sort of shocked by my level of preparation in the live element of things. I do think he was surprised. And that play was closely contested. And so we went into the online portion of things. You and I have talked about this, and I've talked about it on other podcasts, but the short of it was, with 240 hands remaining, I was down 16,200, and we had the side bet of 150K to 100K. Neither of us...
You're playing 100, 200, right?
We're playing 100, 200.
So you're less than a buy-in down at that point.
Right. And neither of us were enjoying the in-stage aspects of play where it was basically entirely about the side bet. And so as we were breaking for dinner, essentially, I made him an offer. I said, look, by previous agreement, we had said that if I won the live component, we would go to this online challenge where you were laying 4-1. Why don't we just scrap the side bet on the live and proceed straight to the online component? And he said, well, maybe, let me think about it. And then he decided to do that. I knew he wanted to play an online challenge very badly anyway. So there we were. Next thing I knew, I was signed up for the online challenge. In terms of the live aspect, the 16.2K, on the one hand, it's not a lot. It's less than a buy-in. On the other hand, the in-game aspects are already firmly in play, because like one could fold out the last 150 hands for, say, 22.5K. Yeah. And so there's crazy like in-game considerations. It's like a tournament ICM situation magnified, basically. And so I don't think either of us were very good at assessing the win probability at that point. I guess people have seen some of these challenges already, so if there were a betting market, that might have been a reasonable way to do it. But it was hard to gauge real time. Do you have an intuition as to what the win probability might have been at that point?
I would need to go and play around with like a variance calculator and make a bunch of different estimates, because there would be like the normal standard deviation for PLO, which, okay, you guys are just playing normally for 200 some hands. Basically there can be all sorts of crazy swings, but we would have to estimate how the standard deviation would change based on this kind of structural metagame thing that's happening. So I would imagine that, like, from Phil's perspective, the standard deviation should really drop, because he's probably going to like start limping, just like not give you opportunities to have big wins. At least that's how I would approach it, because I still want to use my position, and I'm happy. I'm giving away some edge by limping, for instance, but I'm still playing a deep stack pot in position. So I don't know how to assess that. I think I could make guesses and put numbers into a variance calculator, but I think it's so far beyond what experience I have from playing cash games that any estimate that I would give is just like pulling a number out of my ass.
It's not at all like normal poker. And that's why I made the offer. I was like, look, I've studied poker for many months now, and I want a test of that. Let's not do this. Let's move on to the online. And I like the idea of getting 4-1 anyway. So it didn't feel to me like something that one could analyze with a variance calculator, let's say. It felt to me like this sort of strange endgame where we were essentially playing a game of chicken where I'm getting close to the point where I need to win every blind. And the game of chicken is essentially like, because I need to capture the majority of blinds, it's like raise, bet, bet, bet. And he has to sort of stand up to me at some point in that game of chicken. Yeah. And so it's like, what is my probability of winning that game of chicken? And if it happens early, that the standoff is early, then we get into a close situation where we're just battling it out close to the zero mark all the way through. It felt to me like somewhere between, it felt to me like I was around a 3-1 dog, but it was hard for me to gather exactly where.
Yeah, it does feel like, especially PLO tournaments are pretty broken because of the ICM implications when you get near big pay jumps. And, you know, in no limit, at least when you have aces or kings, you can have somebody as an 80-20 underdog, but having aces in PLO with like some ICM pressure might not even be enough. So there's just all sorts of weird things that can happen in games where equities run close, and there's that kind of external pressure that exists. So yeah, that is kind of a wild thing to think about. And did you anticipate that coming in? Did you have the idea that, oh, there might be this stage where some kind of like non-poker, and it's still a poker game, but there's this weird end game thing happening?
A little bit, but I didn't spend time analyzing it. As you know, I was focused exclusively on playing good cash game heads up poker in a vacuum. And I really didn't concern myself with strategies of changing variance, like either increasing or decreasing variance. I just concerned myself with good, solid heads up cash game play. Now, going forward, it's interesting in this online part of the challenge, there are times you want to ratchet up variance, and there are also, unlike the live challenge, times where you're playing very deep, or there's more time where you're playing very deep. So I've been preparing hard this week, studying up some spots. In the book, if we're breaking down the book for people, why the book is worth the purchase price for a very serious poker player. First of all, you have in there Munker solutions for pre-flop heads up play for various levels of stack depth. I studied the deeper stack play, but you have some very innovative stuff there for 10 big blinds, 20 big blinds, 40 big blinds. Anyone who's spending any time at all at those stack depths, I think, would be surprised by the optimal solutions, and it would be very, very important to study these. So that's one thing that you have that is very, very innovative and very important, and sort of immediately profitable for one that studies them. Then you have a large section on flop play, where you've generated your own quite easy to read graphical representations of strategy. I I don't know where you got the idea to do this, but it's quite brilliant the way that you graphically illustrate things. The short of it is that for flop play, you take the Munker solutions, put them into a spreadsheet form, and then summarize the spreadsheet in graphically by organizing the hands that one might have on a particular flop. Let's just say the flop is, let's just say it's a rainbow flop, king, queen, 6, rainbow. So you organize the graph basically from strongest to weakest, where the strongest is on the left side and the weakest is on the right side. So on the left side, it will say king, king, king. And on the right side would be complete air, but one off the left side would be trip queens, and then you would have a category, say ace king with open in straight draw. You'd have wraps, king top 2 pair, all of the possible hands ranked from strongest to weakest, and then for each category you would have what your recommended action is. So let's just say that the action one is considering is it's 120 big blinds deep, and the out of position player has 3-bet, the big blind player is called, and now the out of position player has bet, and the in position player is deciding what to do. You basically have the frequency of call, raise, fold for each of the possible hands. And this was, for me, quite a great way to organize things. And so you have these types of graphs for a wide variety of different flop types and a wide variety of different sort of stack depths and pre-flop actions. You probably have in the course of the book maybe 60 such representations for just flop play. And then for many of the flops, you then look at turn situations that might develop. So you then look at the turn actions and the optimal frequencies for, let's just say in this instance, let's say the turn was a blank, like a 2. You might look at it from the out of position player, given that they've 3-bet and then say bet a third of the pot on the flop and been called. What hands on the turn would they check with, and what hands might they say bet 3/4 pot with? And again, you'd have the graphical representation, and you'd say, well, if they have trip kings and nothing to go with it, they might attempt for a check raise. And if they have trip bottom set with an open ender, they might bet every time, and so on and so forth. And then you could also turn it around and look, okay, what is the optimal response from the in position player when facing the 3/4 pot bet from the out of position player. So this is a very, very profitable way to proceed. And you also do a great job of breaking down why the solution is the solution, or why you think the computer is coming up with this solution in a certain spot. So at the risk of like losing a lot of viewers before we talk about some life stuff that I want to talk about, some of your life, I do want to sort of dive in for one second. What we're doing big picture is we're studying computers answers to problems that we're interested in. And the computers are basically playing heads up PLO with themselves under sometimes no constraints, but sometimes some small constraints that we've imposed on their play. And they're using a game theoretic construct called counterfactual regret minimization to basically systematically eliminate nodes that are dominated or that are not EV maximizing, and they're converging after a long period of time into best solutions, or as the computer is playing another computer, best response to the best response that the other computer is coming up with, and then we're basically getting this solution set as output, and as humans we're studying this solution set to look for patterns, or in some specific instances to maybe copy the solutions that the computer has come up with. What I have found as a player is, and maybe this is because I come at things from an econ standpoint or from a game theory standpoint, what I often find is that when I look at a solution set, I immediately see that this is a better solution to a problem that I've been thinking about for a long time. And so I can immediately profit from incorporating it into my game because I immediately see that this is a better solution. And I think at least that I can understand why the solution might be the solution. But we always have this problem that the computer can't explain.
Articulate or recognize that, okay, you know that this is a better solution because it's the computer output, but what triggered in your mind what made it so self-evident that solution was better? I'm curious of like how you're approaching that, especially like so I can apply it to other things outside of poker.
Well, let's take a specific example, like pre-flop small blind versus big blinds in no limit hold'em, let's just say, where it's say 6 max with an ante or whatever, and you're trying to balance all of the competing factors, like you're out of position in the hand, the pot's laying you a massive price for just calling and seeing some cards. Aggression is powerful because you're being laid a big price to steal the pot. If you have a premium hand where your opponent might fold, there's compelling reasons not to give him a free look at the flop. Like, you're balancing a lot of competing considerations, right? And over years, humans have sort of looked at the problem and they've come up with a lot of different solutions. Some people like to limp and call a lot of raises. Some people like to either, for the most part, fold or enter the pot with a raise. Like, there's a lot of different solutions that computers have come up with. But when you look at the Munker solution in that spot, where they basically, at say 100 big blinds, will always call, but then have a fairly aggressive limp re-raise strategy where they're penalizing the aggression of the in-position player. And their limp re-raise sizing is quite large. And also their limp re-raise ranges are constructed in a way where if they've chosen to limp re-raise with a particular hand, they are quite stubborn. So they're essentially making the statement when they call that that we would like to just play a passive pot and take advantage of the big pot odds that are being offered to the small blind for a wide assortment of hands. This is what we would like to have happen. However, if you decide to raise, most of the time we're just going to call and take advantage of the pot odds on offer. But some of the time we're going to have this situation that is quite aggressive. And this sort of some probability of a kamikaze response is enough to deter aggression on the part of the in position player. And as a solution set, it's quite pretty and it makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And I can understand if you can put yourself in the in position player and say, is there a reasonable way to deal with this? And like, there's not. The best response to a best response for the in position player is to take a lot of hands that they might have liked to raise and just play them passively instead. And the in position player is forced into a somewhat calm mode. I mean, they're still taking advantage of their position and raising fairly often, but they're not just blindly raising to take advantage of their position, and they're taking some hands that are better than average and checking them behind. So it's this sense where I say that the solutions immediately make sense, or like when you look at the say the hands that Munker likes to check raise on the flop on PLO versus the hands that as a human you might have intuitively check raised. I think they're just more logical, and when you read through the hand sets, it's just logical. Mm-hmm. Now there are some aspects of the Munker solutions that that are logical, but they're tough to see exactly how Munker is making certain trade-offs. So, for instance, on the pre-flop solutions, which I think are extremely valuable, I think that the raising hands, the open hands make a lot of sense. The big blind strategy makes a lot of sense. But it gets somewhat harder to interpret when you get into the 4-betting and 5-betting type strategy. It gets hard to understand why Munker is doing what it's doing. I think the 4-betting is, and basically we're assuming 100 big blinds. If you 3-bet me, which you're doing about 17.5% of the time, then basically in the steady state in Munker world, I want to 4-bet you about 5 to 5.5% of the time, right? And if it's 5, if it's say 5.2, then half the time that I'm 4-betting you, I have aces. Basically the way Munker plays can be tough to interpret because the hands that it's choosing for 4-betting and 5-betting have, it seems like more to do with blockers than with equities, or like I'm 4-betting you with good aces. Well, with most aces, all but the worst aces. And I'm 4-betting you with, it's inclined to 4-bet with hands essentially that are good hands that have an ace in them. Mm-hmm. And as a human, you would reason that this is because if you're 3-betting 17.5%, and I have an ace, you're much less likely, you're half as likely to have aces in your hand. And so, I'll take that chance.
I also retain equity against things like king, because just having that extra overcard gives me just a little bit more of a shot to improve.
And then the 5 betting from the big blind will also include some good hands with an ace, which is sort of non-intuitive for a human, really. It's hard for a human to like sort of go all in with a non-ace's hands, sort of, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But basically, it is a fair generalization to say that if they 4-bet, well, what would be an example of like a bad ace's hand that would 5-bet, or a not amazing hand with an ace that would 5-bet?
There will be some that have like a gapped rundown. So if you have, I mean, it's not a bad hand, something like ace 8, 6, 4, double suited, you can definitely imagine 3-betting that. And then hands of that nature end up kind of becoming 5-bets, because, you know, if you get any fold, that's great. And it just always retains equity, even against ace, when you have, say, like 3 low connected cards and you're double suited, you're just never that bad. And if you have an ace in your hand, you have 1 nut suit when you're double suited. So it's not like in Hold'em where you're kind of like cringing a little bit because it's like, oh, ace king into aces, I have 10% equity or something like that. You're always going to be doing okay. So it's often, yeah, like those 3 low cards, especially if they have some connectivity. If it's ace 8, 7, 6, yeah, you can just kind of like rip it in. But I think there are some that have like a gap between each of the card. But all of these end up just being like mixed strategies, like mixed frequencies. They don't always jam. They're just kind of balancing with our ace. So you kind of, you're selecting from like a smattering of different ace high hands, usually with like low connected ish cards.
In the book, it stops at 100 big blinds. But say at 200 big blinds, the solutions change quite a bit, because obviously the penalties to running up against aces are that much more severe, and the action as a whole sort of cools down a little bit. Like the 3-bet frequencies at 300 go down to, or at 300 BBs go down to around 14% or so. So everything sort of simmers down a little bit, and you really have less like 5 betting and that kind of thing, right?
There's a little bit. I would have to go and check 300 big blinds. I was under the impression that it didn't drop that much. You're right. I think it does drop a little bit, but I felt like 14 is kind of a lot. So I'd have to go and check that. I'm actually in the process of adding some of the deeper stacked stuff. So in a newer edition of the book, I have 200 big blind 3-bet pots. So everyone who's bought the book, I'm going to give everyone an update. So the book is still kind of something that's evolving, and based on like what people are, the feedback that they're sharing. So there are going to be a few more things added.
That is something actually that I got from another source, and it is suspect in the sense that then you become too high card heavy, right? If 2.5%, if you're three betting all aces and that's 2.5% of 14%, and then you're also three betting a lot of kings and a decent number of your queens, then you're a little bit too high card, high pair heavy in these big three bet pots if you're down to 14%.
Yeah, I'll have to examine that. But that's a problem, and that was something that we talked about before the match. Does it make sense to avoid, like, to play a tighter three bet range in order to simplify our life and avoid some of these kind of weird spots? And we kind of concluded that, against somebody who's not very observant, they probably don't recognize that when you narrow your three betting range, you actually hit some boards harder and you miss some boards. And that creates larger asymmetries that an in-position player can take advantage of. But against like a good player like Phil is, he's probably going to have a pretty good feel, and especially online, have a good feel for your frequency. And he's also going to know the adjustment. Oh, this guy's only three betting 10%. I'm going to fold a bit more on ace high and two Broadway boards because they're going to hit those boards harder. And then I'm going to get really aggressive on the 7-4 deuce because it's just hard for Brandon to ever hit anything with a 10% three bet range.
I realize that we can talk poker forever, so I'm going to give 15 more minutes of poker, and then we're going to get into some other topics that I want to hit. Yeah. And we might as well just dig into the match with Phil. I will tell you my surprises based on my study and how play actually went down. My surprise was that in the spot where I anticipated maximum discomfort, the big pots where I had three bet hands that I wouldn't have three betted in a previous life, those were actually pots where I fared quite well.
Okay.
Both in terms of the quality of my decisions and the results in pots. We never prepared, you and I, or me in general, for an online challenge. The online challenge was not something I anticipated taking on unless I won the live challenge. It just happened that we decided to scrap the side bet on the live and proceed straight to the online, and I found myself playing online. I had played on WSOP in the past, not cash, but some of the tournaments that they had. I didn't realize that WSOP was constructed for especially fast play. Maybe they had done some sort of consumer testing. This is what they came up with. It was a shock to me. And we had said that we would play two tables most of the time just for speed of play. I was shocked at the speed of play. And in particular on WSOP, if you don't make your decision in 5 seconds pre-flop, it folds you out without auto-activating your time bank. And you're playing two tables at once. Like that's very tough. So that was quite an adjustment. And you and I have talked about some big hands that happened on day one. I made a mistake where I flopped top set, turned another set, and on the river had like 75% of pot left and bet in a spot where it just wasn't a smart bet. And I burned, I think, a decent bit of EV there. Where the flush came in and like one of the lesser straight cards, and it was a check fold, and I bet. And that was a spot where I wouldn't have made the same decision live, I don't think. And it was a spot where I burned some EV. And so I think the online, it does make his edge higher because of the rapidity of the decisions. And also just I just so much prefer the live tempo. And this is something that, having had a few days experience, I'm better prepared for going forward, I think. But in general, other than that one pot, which actually was a 3-bet pot that would have been played under any version of Brandon because it was a very premium hand. I had good experience in 3-bet pots out of position, which surprised me because in many of the pots, I was just navigating based on our work together and just navigating based on my interpretation of the Munker solutions. That was a pleasant surprise. It might be that as we get deeper, I will find myself in some tricky river spots in those pots. So I wish your book was, instead of 340 pages or whatever, like 450 pages, and the river section were expanded by like 110 pages. And the rivers are always going to be tough, like in a book like yours, because every situation is so particular based on stack depth, and everything's so particular that maybe it's asking too much to have river play examples, because like, what do you really learn studying one particular situation in depth? But for me, that's one aspect of the book that is great now, but could be a little chunkier.
Yeah, we do have some river stuff in there for various stack sizes, but yeah, like you said, you really need to draw a lot of, come up with a lot of overarching concepts to unify things. And I think I did that, but it is hard to catch all of the different little subtle nuances, especially when you're using like multiple bet sizes on the river, changing stack sizes and all that.
The other like big picture thing is that I had spent a lot of time studying 3-bet pots. I thought they were going to be overwhelmingly important in determining the match. And I studied them both because I thought they would teach me how to play 3-bet pots as the aggressor, but also assuming that he's also 3-betting 17.5%, it teaches me how to respond to his aggression. And I thought that those pots were going to be overwhelmingly important for the match. I neglected the fact that single raise pots, although smaller, happen far more often. And the spots, although simpler and less consequential, they just repeat over and over again. So if someone has a strategic edge, if someone has just a better ranges, better frequencies, that they're sort of printing money in those spots. And I found that he was able to use his position very well in these single raise pots and effectively play them better than me. I thought that, like, relative to Munker, the way... Okay, put it this way. Why would Phil lose to a bot that played perfect Munker? Because he's always a little more comfortable resting on the careful side of optimal. So that's where you kind of want to get. Like you don't want to also be on the careful side of optimal. You want to get as close as you can, even though that's uncomfortable, because like, although you can't play that way, that is the way to have an edge on Phil. And I'm not trying to have an edge. I'm just trying to justify playing the match, getting 4-1, which is a different problem. But at any rate, Phil is a little bit more comfortable on the careful side of optimal. And it's always uncomfortable for a human to get to that optimal level of play because it is quite aggressive. What I found happening in the single raise pots is that he probably assessed that I had done some level of preparation with game theoretic solutions, whether it was your book or whether it was his vision trainer on Run It Once. He probably correctly assessed that I was going to do some work like that. And so he gave me a set of problems that were different. And if I were to generalize, what he did was, against population, most people are over continuation betting. And they're playing a lot of action on the flop, and they're sort of over continuation betting, and then their ranges are a little bit weak on the turn, let's just say. And also their sizing is close to like the Munker sizing, where it's, if they continuation bet, it's say half pot as a generalization. So what Phil did, I think, knowing that I was prepared for that, or that I was likely prepared for that, he continuation bet like slightly less than optimal. When he did continuation bet, he continuation bet probably slightly less than optimal, even though his sizing was higher. Like his sizing was 1K into 1200. And then on the turn, his pattern was mostly pot. So he had a stronger range than one would be used to on the turn because he under c-bet. And then as the out of position player, you're up against pot if you choose a passive line. Which honestly is tough to combat if the ranges are well constructed. I won't go into the counters or where my thinking is now. But basically in the live play, I found myself challenged in some of those single raise pots, and having not prepped for the line that he was taking, my attempts to improvise solutions by, for instance, trying to come up with some good ranges to lead turn with and some good sizings there and so forth, worked okay, but not great. He was still having a nice edge in the single raise pots in position. But that said, I was surprised that this was the uncomfortable spot, and I was very comfortable in the 3-bet pots out of position. And I was quite comfortable also with the 3-bet pots where I had position, where I was responding to his aggression.
Some of that also can be like another weird version of variance, where maybe it was the most plus EV thing for us to do, to analyze playing 3-bet pots out of position. And it just so happens that the most consequential pots based on luck came up in single raise pots, or you've just gotten so comfortable with the out of position 3-bet pots that now you kind of recognize your need to improve in the other aspect. It's like you took what you thought was the weakest part of your game and maybe you've made it the strongest part of your game now.
Yeah, they weren't, the single raise pots were not consequential in terms of chips won and lost. It was that I could sense that I was hurting from an EV standpoint, strategy on strategy in those pots. It is something that I've studied. And then also what I've been sort of studying this week, well, this might give away too much, so we wouldn't go into this so much, but there were, I don't want to get into the later part, but suffice it to say that if I'm examining the hand histories, I noticed that he would do a better job getting to showdown cheaply in 3-bet pots when he was out of position than I did when I was out of position. And so that's a big picture issue that I'm working on. And it's not surprising that he's able to do that because, for instance, like blocking bets and well-constructed ranges there are a good portion of your book for late position play, and it's not surprising that he's good at that stuff. With that, I think we can go on. Do you have any questions about our match or strategies or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm interested for the online portion. You guys are still playing across from each other, right?
Well, that was the original intention.
Okay.
That was the original plan, and I would like to do that for fun. So maybe I'll bring it up with Phil again.
Yeah.
It's not one of the firm conditions because he just wanted to be home.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I would like to do that for the Vegas component, but I think he would like to just be at home with his young son and hang out.
Yeah.
So
Understandable.
Yeah, maybe I'll bring that up again, but
I had no way of assessing is I know you've played some super high stakes, no limit games, going back for a long time. So I didn't know what kind of live skills you had. And I don't expect Phil to be a big tell box or anything, but I think that was one of the most interesting features of the match, and one that was not going to be well encapsulated by the betting lines. Since most of your play is live, how much of an edge do you feel that you can get on, say, the average live player, just from those non-explicitly poker skills, just like the live aspects? Do you feel you can pick things up?
I think against someone that had, say, been playing in a casino for less than a year, it's very likely that you'd pick up stuff in big pots, and it's very likely that you could pick up like certain adrenal tells in big spots that would be super important. Against Phil, I did not find it relevant. I expected that maybe I would, but I just didn't. So that's sort of the way that went down. And look, in the live portion, he played great as expected. There were of course, like, you look back at a couple spots where had it gone this way. There was one hand where I had 2 pair and a flush draw against his aces and a flush draw. And if I won that hand, I was extremely likely to win the match. So that's one I look back on in disappointment. And then to his credit, there was one where I made a big bluff with the nut straight blockers on the river. and he used like 5 time banks. This was at the end of day 3, and then he called with the second nuts, and again, that swing would have been the difference between me being a big favorite, like a very big favorite, versus not. So like as expected, he played well. And then in the online component, again, this is the last we'll do on the poker stuff, but on the online component, the way the flow went down was the first day we play like a 3-hour session or so. This was immediately after 4 straight days of playing online.
I must have fried your brain coming into playing so fast.
Yeah. Also, there are logistics, like you have to load the online account and stuff. Like it was a tiring period. But the first session, I think I was down like 74K, so it didn't go well. But when I reviewed the hands, there were a few hands that I was not thrilled about that we went over, but there was only one of those situations where I had the 2 top sets and bet 3/4 pot on the end that I was like super unhappy with. And then all of the pre-flop selection and stuff, I was quite, there were a lot of things I was quite happy with. And there were some, so I felt like that was just sort of a normal session that went the wrong way. And then the second session, I was just extremely pleased with all the way around. Like we played 1,000 hands in one day, which is a ton of poker. I had adjusted to the online tempo, and I was just extremely, extremely happy with the quality of decisions and the way that I played. And there I won 47 or 48 or something like this, right? And then all of a sudden I'm feeling quite good. And I reviewed all those hands and I was happy. I'm feeling good because 1,300 hands in, I'm down a buy-in. I'm like quite happy with the decision making. I feel confident that it's a good spot getting the 4-1 on the outcome of the match. Then I have one bad session. And basically what happened in this session is that early on we play a hand where it's a 4-bet pot pre. And my hand is ace jack 5-5 double suited. And the board comes queen, queen, 5 with no flush draw. Phil has aces and a backdoor flush draw. I check, he bets, I check raise, we're in, right? And then he hits an ace on a river, so he whatever could hit an ace or a queen to win, and he hit the ace there. That's just one small thing that happens over the course of a match, but what the psychological effect was that I went from basically I would have been at that point winning in the match through 1,500 hands to now being loser in the match, and then like with this type of match, you can't say, all right, I'm going to go play golf this afternoon, right? Like you have to keep playing for another 4.5 hours, which is brutal, right? Like that's far different. You have to keep playing 2 tables for another 4.5 hours after something like that happens where you might have taken a break.
You don't have that typical cash game edge of just saying, man, I don't feel like it. I don't feel it today.
So what happened there is there was no tilt as traditionally thought, right? There's no like steam, like just barrel. Like there's none of that.
Hitting a mouse, yeah.
Yeah. What happened is the opposite of that, where I then start to just get a little bit more passive than I had been on, say, Saturday, where I had played so beautifully. Just like I have my conception of where optimality is based on our work together. And I'm trying to be there because I know I have to be there against Phil. The only way to tread against him is to be a little bit on the aggressive side. And instead I go a little bit towards the passive side. And that's not where I want to be. It's just the wrong place to be in the match with Phil. So then for the next 4.5 hours, I find myself playing more passively than I did on Saturday, and also running pretty bad. And then that session is down like whatever, 100. So the total is minus 130 or whatever, 135. But that was a bad feeling to be into that passive side where I had played beautifully on Saturday, trying to be on the aggressive side, on the active side.
As a coach, I would ask, like, what is your game plan when you recognize that tendency? Like, let's say you get back to the session, you get coolered, or you just, like, he sucks out in a major way. How do you pull yourself out of that like tendency towards passivity back to that place where you're just kind of free and you don't care what the result is and you're just trying to make the best play? Because I would say that, like, especially when it comes to heads up, while skill obviously is incredibly important, the place where players really beat other players is having just a rock solid mental game. And I think that from my own experience, if somebody maybe doesn't even have the same level of technical ability, they may be even like 2 levels below you, but if they are just so solid, that almost accounts for more. So it's almost like, I guess I would ask you, like, the other preparation is important, but what's your preparation to get out of that passive leaning when things go wrong? What's your mental preparation?
It's funny. Jungle Man says, I had the podcast with Jungle Man, and he says that he's long recognized this tendency in himself where he tilts by becoming passive. And so he actively fights it by going the other way. And when he takes a beat, like, get actually slightly more aggressive. I found that quite interesting. Because Jungle Man is one that he often puts forward the impression that he's on tilt, especially live. But he actually rarely tilts. Like, his play doesn't demonstrate tilt, but his demeanor will demonstrate tilt. I found that interesting. But in terms of my game plan, and again, at the risk of giving away too much information, I've sort of taken a look at where we are in the challenge, and 10,000 hands is a long challenge, but it's also not that long, right? So we're 2,300 hands in. I have sort of a stop loss based on how many hands we have remaining. And it's probably somewhat conservative, but it's just based on what I think my probability of winning is, having a small penalty for variance, and like, it just is what it is, like based on number of hands and how much I'm down, like that, right? And also, you keep in mind that Phil, he can change his variance along with his, he can change his variance as part of his strategy without sacrificing as much EV as other people might if they were changing their variance. If I get behind a good bit more than I am now with, say, 6,000 hands remaining, the fact is that I'm not likely to win the match. So I guess this is a long-winded way to say that if you lose 40,000 or whatever, that's just a normal course of things. If let's say I don't imagine having to confront in the short term the challenge of, oh, you're down 80, like how are you going to play now? Because there's not that much play remaining. Do you know what I'm saying? So I would say that it's kind of less of a factor, but in terms of the course of the overall week, how to deal with the tilt, I think for me, it's just lifestyle management. Just try to get to bed early and work out before we play, and don't drink too much coffee and wine, and like leave it at that. I feel like your chess background informs the book quite a bit, because I'm not a huge chess player myself, but you mentioned the idea that in chess, it's very important to maximize the efficiency of study, to study particular things that have basically the highest ROI per hour. And in poker, you suggest that one of your skill sets is determining what is most profitable to study at any moment. And the reader benefits hugely from this, because in the book, you have things that you say are immediately profitable to study. And it's those things that probably took you the most time in the writing of the book, stuff like the pre-flop charts, the way that you summarize pre-flop play for 100 bigs, 40 bigs, 20 bigs, etc. And then also you have some extremely innovative stuff, like, for instance, the river thresholds that I take it conceptualize that this might be a useful heuristic for humans, and so you sort of constructed these river threshold charts and then made a study of these charts. And so your background in chess, if I recall, you were somewhat of a late starter. Like you weren't playing when you were 2 or 3. You started, I don't know, in middle school or so?
I think 16. So it's actually 15 or 16. So high school-ish.
And then you got to a very high level. For chess fans, you could give us your peak rating or peak ranking or what have you.
Yeah, I think by 20 years of age, in the US, I was about 2,300. The ratings are a little inflated in the US. So if you were to do that for FIDE, which is the international chess agency, or the big organizer of all the international chess events, it would probably be more like 2,200. I think my actual FIDE was like maybe 2,100, because I think I only played maybe 10 tournaments, because there weren't, unfortunately, I was like a broke college kid at the time and couldn't afford to like travel to New York or travel to Europe, especially there, to play in these tournaments. And there weren't that many on offer. So my rating kind of, it encompassed all of the years that I was playing. So it never kind of caught up to where I was at the end. But like, So the best players in the world will have a 27, 2800 FIDE rating. So yeah, I was maybe 600 points below that, but it's kind of like a master level. In the US, they have a national master title. In FIDE, when you're 2300, you get the FM, the FIDE master title. But yeah, I mean, that's actually one of the beautiful things about poker in comparison to chess, is that poker, you can really start playing 5 cent, 10 cent. And if you are dedicated and you work your butt off, you can climb all the way to high stakes. In chess, it really helps to either be born in the right place, be born in a country that cares about chess and will finance, like give stipends, or to kind of have rich parents, or at least like really supportive middle class, upper middle class parents. So you'll often see the people who get the best at chess will have one of those things. Internet makes it a bit better. It's more progressively evening the playing field, but I think that's one advantage that poker has had, especially online poker, is you can climb up from the absolute bottom.
So I imagine it's quite rare to start at age 16 and reach that level.
I guess it's probably somewhat rare. I don't know many people who did it. Usually the kids that were kind of on a similar level had started much earlier. But also my sample size was really skewed because I was coming from the Midwest in the US, and there wasn't really a huge chess culture in the city where I was starting out. There were some, but kind of the best player in my area was my teacher, and he was like the strongest active player. So there was kind of a cap on, like, you weren't going to be able to play a bunch of world-class grandmasters every weekend as if you were in, say, New York City or something.
I know nothing about your college age years. What was your experience in the college age years?
So I got a degree in psychology, which I found very useful for poker. Not so useful for many other things, like getting employed, but very valuable in terms of relationships and in terms of, recognizing like why gambling even works. So like basically the whole baseline of gambling is that there's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, where people are bad at assessing their own skill at things. And so it's like, if I'm bad at assessing my skill and I think you're bad, but you're clearly a better player, that's why we can gamble for money. So I studied psychology, and I think it was really helpful for that. But yeah, I didn't find school inspiring. I felt like I'm a very self-directed learner and did not enjoy jumping through the hoops that they placed for me. And so I actually stopped with one semester left because poker was beginning to take off, and I wanted to see how well I could do. And then a few years later, after I had reached, I think, 10-20 no limit hold'em on the American sites, I went and finished the final degree, or the final semester. And just one of the teachers asked me why I came back, and I said, yeah, so my mom doesn't die of terminal disappointment.
So I take it that when you started studying poker, it was quite a systematic effort, because clearly you were a very efficient learner in chess, and you were also quite dedicated in terms of number of hours. I imagine that at some point it sort of went from 100% chess to 100% poker.
Actually, I would say that I started out being very inefficient in chess, but just having the capacity for like extreme brute force input. Like through my high school summers, I would just like sit in a room and study chess with like 2 analysis boards for like 8 hours straight, just nonstop. Just like the capacity to grind when it comes to something that I'm interested in. I think that's probably one of my greatest skills, but I actually wasted a lot of time. I think if I were to lose all of the chess skill and then have to try to reacquire it, now my system would be incredibly systematic. I'm actually doing this with learning German, which is kind of my new passion. And I've reached a pretty decent level after like 2 years because I've already made all of these technical mistakes in learning. So in poker, I started out being more systematic, but actually I came into poker with the intention of being a professional before having ever really played a hand. I knew through chess that there were like some of my chess friends were professional poker players. So I knew this was a thing that existed. And so I started kind of studying very systematically, trying to figure out what the first principles were. And one thing that I was really willing to do was invest earlier. So we already mentioned the Andrew Seidman beluga whale coaching. I just there's such a disconnect in mindset from like amateur to professional when they think about hiring a coach. Like amateurs think about costs, professionals think about return on investments. So an amateur might have seen his 7.5 hours for $1,500 or whatever it was as that's a cost. I saw it immediately as an investment. And so just that mindset of like, this is going to save me a lot of time. I'd already learned a fair bit, but just being willing to invest in like bet on myself. That was one of the things that accelerated my growth. And I got lucky enough that I had read his book and I'm like, okay, I believe in this guy. And I like the way that he's presenting information. And I was just willing to take that bet that like, I can do this. And I think that was the thing that chess gave me is like, okay, if I get as good at chess, or if I get as good at poker as I am at chess, I'm making a good living. And I know I can do that. And I don't think that I was like some super genius at chess at all. Probably have some talent, but it's like mostly a process. And so I was just willing to bet again on myself. I probably had maybe $3,000-$4,000 at the time. So it was like half of my life roll that I was betting on myself because I just believed that with enough struggle and that capacity for hard work, it would pay for itself. And a lot of people just are not willing to do that. And I have a lot of friends that I try to encourage them when they have these skills and abilities for anything, like it's more of a risk to not bet on yourself, in my eyes, because then you waste 10 years of life and you don't get those back.
So big picture, okay, if you think of like Tim Ferriss, for instance, mm-hmm. When he wrote his book, The 4-Hour Workweek, back in 2008 or whatever, there was a reason that it was a runaway bestseller at the time, because there was actually not a lot written on what he focused on, which was rapid skill acquisition and lifestyle design. Yeah. And so he wrote his book, and it was quite a good book. And then he's developed a franchise on those two things. And his podcast is amazing. Not surprisingly, it's one of the best, one of the most popular podcasts. But he focuses on those two areas, rapid skill acquisition and lifestyle design, which now 2020, those things, so many podcasts in those areas. And we haven't talked much life. We've talked more poker, but it seems like you're quite innovative in those two areas. Let's start first with rapid skill acquisition. So there are books, there are coaches, there are people that specifically study rapid skill acquisition. You're clearly very interested in rapid skill acquisition and optimal learning. Are you a disciple of anyone in particular? Are there podcasts that you listen to, books that you follow in that area?
So I actually had the 4-Hour Chef by Tim Ferriss, where he talks about cooking, but he actually talks a lot about language learning, which is kind of surprising for a cookbook. But I took away some of the principles that he outlined in that book. So that was probably my first knowing conscious introduction to like the idea of meta learning. And I think I've kind of done it without having that meme or that term behind it. But that really kind of accelerated the process. So one of the cool things he talks about in the book is, okay, if you want to learn a new language, you can encapsulate a lot of the pretty much all of the different grammatical structures in a few short lines. And then just by translating into the new language, you can see, okay, how do the modal verbs work? How does the present perfect or past tense work? And he gives an example of this famous bishop or cardinal who was reportedly knew 70 some languages. And he would take the Our Father, the prayer, and translate it into every language. And it showed him enough of the different grammatical structures that he already knew, okay, is this an SVO, meaning like subject, verb, object language? So like how is it structured? How do the conjugations work? In the case of German, if there are two verbs, you have verb in the second position, verb at the end, things like that give you an overall structure. So kind of coming back to poker, what I was thinking about, like overall structure, okay, if we start with pre-flop, that's super important. But also I like this idea, like you were talking about, the river value thresholds, where we kind of create a bookend of saying, like, on this board, given this many bets, you can always value bet down to this hand. Well, if you know pre-flop ranges and you know the thinnest value hands you can bet in the check bet line or the bet line, then you're already starting, like your game is already starting to correct the middle portions, like the flop and the turn play, by having good pre-flop ranges and good river thresholds. So I guess it comes down to thinking about first principles and like what really matters. What are the core truths about what we're doing? So I wrote a beginner book for Run It Once, and I just like pose really simple questions like, what's the goal of poker? Everyone will say, okay, you want to win money. Well, actually you want to win the most money, because as we know, there's a lot of decisions that both calling and raising win money, but you want to pick the decision that wins the most. And so like that's one first principle. Another poker first principle would be like, we're really just trying to win the blinds. Like that is the objective. If you just win the blinds, you just make millions of dollars just from winning the blinds. Like it's amazingly profitable, and more profitable than even like getting called by a worse hand in most cases. So knowing those principles, you can figure out a lot of like core truths of the game. So that's the thing that I'm always trying to come back to, is what are the deepest fundamental elements of whatever game we're playing, whether it's investing, whether it's like building relationships even. It's a universal approach.
I feel like your book is quite innovative because poker authors forever have been trying to answer the question, why do we bet? Like, and if we go back to Sklansky, it's a bet is always a value bet or a bluff. And then I'm blanking on his first name, but Janda had a good series of no limit books. Yeah. And he broke it down a bit more. And then your book has, to my estimation, the best sort of current rationale for why bet. Of course, the computer can never explain why it's doing what it's doing. But basically your explanation of why bet is that if we're going to understand the computer solutions, we have to understand what the computer is doing. It's sort of going through the game tree and systematically, it's not going through the game tree. It's doing counterfactual regret minimization, which is through many iterations of play, eliminating paths that turn out to be worse. And so your explanation of betting is essentially that the in-position player has a problem where they can either bet or check and see the next card, and the game tree is reasonably simple to evaluate, or those two options are reasonably simple to evaluate. But the out of position player has a complex game tree that can really never be simple. You can never simplify it as value bet or bluff, or you can never simplify it in any categorization that is simple, because essentially the out of position player has two options. They can bet, and their bet can be of any sizing, or they can check and have the full arsenal of the in positions player strategic options imposed on them. Yeah. And because checking involves having the strategic options of the in position player imposed on you, it's often better to bet. And so the betting ranges of the out of position player are often quite funky and involve combinations of value and bluff, and depending on which street and stack depths and so forth, there are block bets and all sorts of things that were thought to be quite bad 15 years ago. So I find it quite interesting, your analysis of the rationale of why we bet.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. It's really coming back to that principle of, okay, from a game theory perspective, everything really gets boiled down to indifference. We want to increase our EV as much as possible. And if we're playing 1 versus 1, if I drive your EV down, then mine has to go up, right? Because it can't go anywhere else. So if I'm trying to construct ranges that make you indifferent, which is driving your EV down to 0, which is good, then then you're always looking for ways to kind of fight against that. I'm the in position player. I want to drive that down. So you, as the out of position player, recognize the hands in your range that if that checks and faces a bet, it's going to be basically worthless. So there's often weird things where it's kind of betting for indifference prevention. There's like essentially turning two pair into a bluff, or like a semi bluff sometimes, because when you start checking, just the amount of equity, and then as a result, the amount of EV you have goes way down when you face the in position player strategy. So when I was able to like grasp that, that helped me understand why the ranges are constructed differently from the in position player's perspective and out of position player's perspective. So yeah, that was a big like aha moment for me in understanding just like what we're trying to achieve in PLO. And it's amazing that it's still not that well known, and like people are making huge mistakes because they're not understanding the different objectives of in position versus out of position. So they essentially play in position as if they were out of position, and they're not properly assessing the value of the check back option, which is hugely valuable.
Yeah. This concept of the focusing on indifference is one of the areas where I think my no limit game has profited from the PLO study. Because you can begin to conceptualize, for instance, say what it would look like if PLO were played, say, no limit on the river, right? Mm-hmm. And the in position player, let's say in spots where the out of position player is capped, can start to bet more than the pot and target better and better hands of the out of position player for indifference and have the EV go up. It's the rationale for exactly why we do that, why we sort of target better and better hands for indifference. Say in this example, let's say you have the naked ace on a flush board and you're able to construct your value and bluff ranges in a way where you're bluffing with larger size and value betting for a larger size and forcing better hands for the out of position player. Like, let's just say jack high flushes that would have easily called a pot size bet to fold, say, or become indifferent. That's valuable for the in position player because by constructing the ranges in that way, you've basically taken a hand that had a lot of value, a jack high flush, and made it worthless. That concept, I think, will help my no limit game. Like just understanding indifference a little bit better from our study, I think will be important in my no limit game. We'll see.
So I wanted to ask you kind of like a first principles question from your area of expertise. And I would say that probably similar to a lot of like reasonably successful poker players, when it comes to investing, I would say the average poker player has a leg up on the average person because we're at least thinking about return on investment and just like have a better guess at how to assess things. And I think I know enough to know that I know very little, which is probably a good first step. I'm curious about, I know how to invest in, say, like a fund that tracks the S&P 500 and like passive investing, pretty easy to read and learn about. And I'm interested in learning some of the first principles about investing in like a single company. Because I would know, like, if we went to the very core, if I wanted to invest in something, I'm looking for it to be undervalued, essentially. That would you say that's like the first very basic principle of, if if you're investing in anything, I'm looking for whatever the current value of that thing. I think that it's actually higher than what the market's assessing it as. Would you agree that that's like the absolute base?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good baseline.
Okay. So what would be the next kind of very basic principle if you were teaching someone for how they would start to assess whether something was under or overvalued? What would be the next step for trying to determine where the evaluation is wrong? It could be a company, it could be, I mean, there are a lot of different things that this would apply for.
I would start you in a different place. It's a bit of a digression, but I would start your studies in a different place. And I would say that there's no simple way to evaluate it. And there's also the question of whether it is something that is a profitable use of time, or should you just invest in this vanilla portfolio and go about other things? Like, there's that question. But let's just suppose that you said you wanted to invest the time, you wanted to know. Here's my advice. I would start entirely from the risk side and not from the return side. Okay. So valuation is sort of, in my mind, more about return, although it does bleed into risk. I would focus on understanding risk very, very well, and then go into understanding the drivers of return. So understanding risk, for a lot of people, that's about understanding the logic of diversification and understanding the logic of mean variance. That stuff probably is intuitive to you. But I would go back, for poker history, go back to Bill Chin and Jared Enkenman's book, The Mathematics of Poker, and read the later sections where they talk about risk of ruin models.
Okay.
And they also have risk of ruin models with stuff like a risk of ruin model where you're spending from the bankroll, let's say. And to summarize risk of ruin models, basically the risk of ruin in any context is much greater than people think. And if you're spending from your bankroll, which everyone is from a practical standpoint, the risk of ruin becomes that much higher. And it's a function of the things we understand. Like, if your variance is lower, your risk of ruin is lower. If your initial bankroll is higher, that's a good thing. If your bet size is large, that increases risk of ruin. If the variance of each bet is high, that increases risk of ruin. It's a function of things that are intuitive, but the cumulative result is that the risk of ruin in every context is higher than we think. Okay. And what your job is in personal finance, it is managing a risk of ruin model where you're trying to live off of a bankroll, and you're making a series of bets in poker and in financial markets. And it's, I think, useful for individuals to conceptualize their personal financial picture in more of this risk of ruin context, and less in a traditional finance theory context, which might be appropriate for, say, a large institution. Yeah. So I would acquaint yourself with risk of ruin models, and then I would acquaint yourself with great thinkers in the area of risk. I would recommend like Aaron Brown's book, Red-Blooded Risk, and just listen to Aaron Brown speak. He's a poker player, but he was also a risk manager at AQR. He's very sharp in this area. And then the whole Nassim Taleb sequence of books, I think, is very important. Yeah. Um, so start with risk. And as part of your analysis of risk, think about underlying assumptions, right? And I think that most of what's learned in like business school and textbooks is not great for thinking about, say, the next 30 years, because basically all of our market history and market data relates to the last 120 years or so, which was a especially prosperous period in history. And we tend to focus on America because we have the most data and the stock market is the biggest in terms of total world capitalization. But when you do that, you're looking at 120 years of ex post the most successful era in human history and ex post the most successful country. That just simply cannot be instructive about what's going to happen over the next 30 years. Especially if you just look outside your window and you see just what's happening everywhere. Like it's extremely unlikely to repeat. So I think the big mistake people make is they make big picture generalizations like you should have 80% of your money in stocks and 20% in bonds and just never look at it. Really? Like that doesn't seem like a great idea. I wouldn't do that personally. I think people assume that the world is likely to repeat in predictable ways when common sense, like assessing the world, suggests that that's not really likely to be the case.
80-20 would apply, like if you can like backwards engineer that and look at the last 120 years and like, oh, that performs very well.
Another way to think about this, like in sort of game theory terms, is like a min-max regret framework, right? Where you're minimizing your maximum future regret. So bringing it back to the bigger picture, I would focus on risk first. Read guys like Aaron Brown and Nassim Taleb. Understand risk models, understand traditional expected utility theory and mean variance optimization, and also understand risk of ruin models, state-dependent utility. And then go from there to, say, valuation. And there are good textbooks on valuation, like Copeland and Weston have a valuation textbook that they use at McKinsey and other places. And I would maybe read some textbooks like that. But in the big picture, I think decisions about risk will be more important for you than decisions about valuation.
Okay.
And Aaron Brown, he talks a lot about the importance of essentially exposing yourself to positive exponentials and avoiding potential ruin from like negative exponentials or things that have tail risk. And Taleb talks a lot about the same things. Basically give yourself, Taleb has a conceptual investment strategy of treasuries plus lottery tickets, right? He doesn't mean it literally, but the idea is that you have like a firm base, but then like, let's say in poker, maybe you have a firm base and then you have some lottery tickets where, let's say someone's developing a new poker site and you think they're the sharpest person possible to do that. You invest in their new poker site or something like that. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, that's my brief rundown on investments. I want to get into two things before we exit. I think we probably have about 20 minutes left on my side. I think I really want to get into your writing ambitions. And before that, I want to get into the lifestyle design stuff. As I want to get into two areas of lifestyle design. First, as I understand it, right now, you are just traveling around, basically working and traveling. I want you to go into how that came about, how long you've been doing it, how long you intend to do it. And then I also want you to talk about the recent sort of self-improvement retreat that you went on that honestly sounds quite hardcore. Um, so
It
maybe
was.
start with the working and travel part of things and then go into the retreat.
Yeah, so I think back in like 2018, I had a good friend from high school who had a technology startup, and I invested in his company. And he was invited by the Dubai Future Accelerator to take part in basically they would pair up startups with a government agency and see if the startup could solve creatively one of their problems. And so he was going to be going to Dubai for 2.5 months and just invited me. Thought, okay, well, I've been to Canada at that point, but basically have not really traveled other than inside the US. I should take this opportunity, even though I would put poker on the back burner. And I met a lot of like really amazing people. I met somebody who became one of my absolute best friends that I've been visiting in Prague. It's a Czech entrepreneur. I met one of my like a long-term partner who we're not together, but still is one of my best friends. And she and I traveled a lot. And yeah, just like had a really positive experience stepping outside of the world that I had been in. And from there, so I had this partner, and she came from India but lived in Dubai. Couldn't easily come to the U.S. Because of visa restrictions. So we would meet up halfway. So we met in Iceland, we met in the Czech Republic, and traveled around Germany. We met in Thailand, and we would do that somewhat regularly as we could. And I just found the experience like some of the best times in my life, like very enriching. I just was seeing the world in a different way, and it was also becoming more self-reliant and just like being put in all of these weird situations that you couldn't anticipate. Um, and from there, I came back to the US and I started looking into, okay, what happens if I just move somewhere? And so I looked into the working holiday visa that New Zealand had. And basically, you could go and live there for a year. And the idea is usually for like kids after college, they go and like pick Kiwis. But I was already playing poker professionally, so I didn't have to do that. But the visa still applied. So I moved to New Zealand for a year. Actually, my visa was about to expire on the end of March 2020. But as people may remember, something happened then and the world kind of changed. So I ended up being stuck there. I had gotten rid of my apartment in Cleveland, where I'm from, and just was kind of locked down and lived in New Zealand and then was stuck there for another 6 months additionally. And from then, I haven't had a place. I did eventually come back to the US when my visa expired, and I traveled kind of from city to city. And yeah, I would just try to visit places that I hadn't experienced before and then just like get a feel for the city. I went and had a month in New Orleans, which I like totally fell in love with.
My birthplace.
Yeah, just I think it's one of the best cities in the US.
Where did you stay?
I was a little bit to the west. I'm forgetting the neighborhood. There was I'll have to look up the neighborhood. So I was the French Quarter's over here, and there's maybe like a couple miles to the west of it, and there it was kind of like a pretty nice suburb, but still on the north side of the river. I'm just blanking on the name of it right now, but yeah, I kind of fell in love with the city and the vibe, and you can see why people think that it's haunted. I don't believe in any of the ghost stories, but it has this energy to it.
Well, it's old.
It's old compared to America, right? Like the things that you'll see there, you won't see except maybe in Boston.
Yeah, it's old. I mean, if you look at, say, Anne Rice, the vampire novelist who's based in New Orleans, her house, like she lives in the Garden District, and her neighborhood has 20,000 square foot houses built before the Civil War. I mean, they literally are haunted, like just crazy houses that are enormous and have basement wine cellars that look like catacombs and just crazy, crazy stuff. So it does feel haunted. They have also the Voodoo Fest every year and the voodoo culture, and it is a little haunted, but that's awesome. And now you're in Stockholm for a few weeks.
Yeah. So I flew to Athens in June. And I was intending to go to Prague to see one of my best friends. But they actually wouldn't let me get on the plane, even though I had a PCR test and a vaccine. They just they said that I actually had to enter enter Europe, get a vaccine there in order to enter Europe. It was that kind of classic catch-22. Like, I don't know what that possibly means, but I stayed in Athens. I met a really cool girl there. I just had an amazing time. Then went to Prague, and now I'm in Stockholm visiting a friend. I'm going to go to Tallinn to visit another friend. But yeah, I mean, I like the challenge. I just had the opportunity to do this with poker and with like coaching online, opportunities that very few people have had. And so I've just tried to take them, especially when I'm young and I'm not attached. I don't have kids. I have the flexibility to do that with work. So just kind of made sense and has challenged me, and I think has made me see the world in a different way. Also, I've gotten really interested in language learning, so it's cool to see how everything is intertwined, and like learning German, but then I recognize all these words in German that are in the Czech language, or how similar Swedish is to German, and just like these really cool connections. It's just been challenging and eye-opening, I would say.
I have a book rec for you. I had Richard Davies on the podcast. He wrote this book called Extreme Economies, and he has a long chapter on Tallinn. It's good. I would recommend that you read that.
That would be perfect reading
before you go. So I want you to go into writing ambitions and then the hardcore retreat. Okay. So the writing is something that I know very little about other than your public bios.
Yeah, so I've really loved writing since since even before I could write. I think I had the conception of this being a cool thing to do, being a storyteller. And my grandparents gave me an old typewriter. And I think I wasn't even at the age where I could actually type, but I just smash on the keys and think that I was telling stories. And so it's been a lifelong goal to write books. And in, I think, 2016 or 2017, I wrote my first poker book using the solver, and that was 3-bet pots in PLO. And that was a proof of concept. Okay, I can at least do this. It's very challenging. It makes me think in a different way than I'm used to, but I'm able to do this. And then I've wanted to write a novel for a long time. But I think part of it, my ego got in the way, where I had been told through school, oh, you have a lot of natural talent for writing. But also I had no system, no process. And also I feel like the way we learn writing in school or like study literature is it's kind of silly, to be honest. It's all like literary criticism. Like what did the green dress on page 47 mean? All of these things, which, okay, it's interesting intellectually to think about it, but rarely did we get into like the technical aspects of how do you choose good, like strong verbs so that you don't have to cover up a weak verb by having an adverb, like the like all of those ly words, like he ran speedily. That's just terrible. How about he sprinted? It's like a much stronger verb. It's shorter, and I didn't have those skills. And I think my ego coming from this place of, oh, I have writing talent, blocked me for a long time from pursuing it. So I did a lot of meditation work, and then I just like downwardly assessed my own skill. Like, oh, I'm not, the reason I haven't been able to do this is because I'm just not nearly as good as I thought I was, which is actually a great place to start. So I hired a coach. She was actually the editor for Tommy Angelo's book. She goes by the name Anna Paradox. And I took some lessons from her, and we talked about some of those more technical aspects, and she gave me books on the subject of writing. And I just started to see the technical task in a different way. And I had already had this story in mind, but I didn't have the skill before. And now the skill is evolving as I'm writing it. And I think I'm learning how to write a novel through the process of writing the one that I'm currently working on. So it currently has like over 50,000 words, maybe another 50,000, and then I'll have the first draft, and then probably chop it down, because that's usually what you do. Like you don't add more, the skill is like chipping away and getting rid of the excess baggage. So that's kind of the process that I'm going to be going on in the next year of writing this thing.
That's amazing. So how many hours per week would you suggest you're spending on that?
Probably 1 to 2 per day. So it could be 10 hours. I just set myself a goal, write 300 words every day. I mostly stick to it. Sometimes things happen. And sometimes I feel like I reached not a block, like a writer's block, but like I don't know where the story's going or how to connect things. And I'll just take some time to like reflect on not what I want, but what the characters want and what the logic of the story dictates. And just kind of try to be open, not impose my will. I mean, this is actually like, I think it even connects to poker. Like when you try to impose your will on the game, you just kind of get slapped. And it's like more like you have to be open to whatever is coming. So in poker, you have to be open to the fact that, okay, now my hand has gone from a value hand to like a bluff catcher. Or you can't like keep, oh, this was still a value hand, one hand to go, I'm going to force my way through. And I think that applies. That is like a universal truth to getting good at anything, is like just acceptance of what the process is and just being open to whatever it gives you. So letting the book tell you what is going to happen, as opposed to saying, I know it's going here, I'm going to force things to go there. I mean, I think that I see that connection in chess, where the position tells you how to play. You don't tell the position how to play. It's the boss. The book is the boss too.
On the concept of over investing in coaching, I have a friend who I think is the best editor in the world. And she does occasionally take on side projects. She's expensive, but not expensive like a good poker coach. Not quite as expensive as that. If you ever want to connect with her, let me know. She edits all of.
Yeah, I absolutely will. 100% will ask.
She edits all of Michael Lewis's books,
Okay.
the nonfiction writer. So she's unbelievable, like absolute genius of an editor, and she will improve your writing guaranteed. So, okay, the last thing, before we had our most recent session, you were about to go off to a hardcore retreat. It sounded crazy. I want to hear all about it. It sounded okay. How did you learn about it? And why did you sign up for something that sounds so unpleasant on the face of it?
My friend in the Czech Republic, he's an entrepreneur. He's really big on like maximizing performance in life. So he's really thinking about physical fitness and performance, getting the most out of his mindset, just like maximizing everything. And it's amazing really what he can do. I have a strong work ethic myself, but just to see somebody for like 10 years working 12 to 14-hour days, just grinding as hard as possible. I really admire that. And I really admire what he's done. So he heard about this training. We've done all sorts of kind of weird seeming things. For instance, I went to India with my Indian partner at the time and came back and was incredibly sick for months. And nothing that the doctors in the US did helped. So one of the things he suggested is you do this thing called Cambo, which is frog poison from the Amazon. And it's not hallucinogenic. It just makes you very sick for a short time. You kind of get rid of everything that's going wrong inside of you. You like hypercharge your immune system. And that actually got me over the hump from the sickness in India. So through some of those people, we've had different experiences like this where we've taken, I'm very interested in things that are scientifically rigorous, but I think I've seen a lot of limitations in modern medicine. I think especially when it comes to chronic problems, I think we're excellent at treating acute problems like getting stabbed or hit by a car or like a heart attack. But some like long-term chronic problems like a back problem does not, like the approach that is recommended does not seem, in my opinion, to be most effective. Like I had a back problem and doctors wanted to use steroids to basically just reduce the inflammation. They said I couldn't weight lift, I should never do yoga. I just did the opposite, and that was like incredibly helpful. So I've come to the conclusion that there are some things that are better treated in unconventional ways. So he heard about this training with this Russian doctor who lives kind of in the middle of nowhere, not quite in the middle of nowhere, but off the beaten path in the Czech Republic. And I would say that the doctor's philosophy is a combination of Buddhism, Stoicism, but in really actionable steps and incorporating like intense physical training. And so my friend went through it. He said that he sees some of the blocks that I have, some of the roadblocks mentally. And he wanted me to help. He wanted to help me break through those, break through limiting beliefs, break through past trauma. And so, okay, I signed up. I'm going to go for 4 days. and stay with this doctor. Well, first of all, he speaks Russian, Ukrainian, and Czech, does not speak English. So we have a translator. My friend is actually helping doing some of the translating. And so he kind of lays out his philosophical approach, but he also is really emphasizing, as part of the training, no mind states, so kind of meditative states. And he does that through a lot of like intense physical exercise with this thing called alpha gravity, which is basically, if you've ever heard of TRX, it's like those, they suspend part of your body from like scaffolding and then you are destabilized. Well, this is the next level where your entire body is destabilized. And it basically forces you into the present moment because you're balancing in all of these weird postures. For instance, I went from like having trouble doing some very basic balancing postures to standing on one of those Swiss balls, like, you know, those big inflatable balls they have in the gym. I was just able to stand on it and balance and then do squats through the course of the training. Other like incredibly intense things, I was just showing my friend doing push-ups on the Bosu ball, which is like the half ball, half platform with only one foot on a Swiss ball. So you're like totally balancing and then doing push-ups like that. So that was part of the training, is these very intense physical practices, and then training your mind to find basically the space between thoughts. And a lot of it was like recognizing, he would really point out the programming that we have running in our heads. So there's programming that tells us who we are. Like, for instance, I imagine myself as a very introverted person. I can be very comfortable not talking to anyone for days or weeks, even though I don't come off like that. And one of the things he pointed out is like, this is just a construct that I've basically made up and I've used it to limit myself. And that was like a powerful thing to recognize. And then there were other really intense parts of the training, like running blindfolded with earphones on. So you're totally disconnected and all you have is like your body. He basically pointed out to me that I'm so cerebral that I'm like, my body and my mind were completely disconnected to the point where I had like energy levels of like an 80-year-old man. He was kind of like, in a very direct Russian way, like telling me that like I'm old and weak. And, you know, I didn't want to believe it at first, but the things that he was telling me, it just became more and more obvious that it was true throughout the course of the training. And so we did things that there were different parts of the training that connect with different traumas that people have. And I don't want to give away too much of it if somebody ever wants to do this, but there were things like, you know, I'm actually not very confident in the water. So then I had to swim across like a pretty big pond blindfolded with ear muffs on. So I'm like completely detached, only with my body, trying to figure out how to do this. And then there were times where there were things that he would do that actually like instantly triggered some of my own past trauma, where like I started crying like immediately. And it was hard for me to release that kind of pain. But when I did, it felt like I was starting to heal some of that disconnection and getting away from the idea of just like my body being something that pilots my brain around, and that actually I need to prioritize my health. Not only that, but like the unification of everything, of connecting with my body and seeing myself as like a full entity rather than just like like purely cerebral person. So yeah, it was 4 days. We didn't eat for 4 days. It's totally juice. Yeah. Working out intense, only juice. You would be amazed at what you could do. So this is the part that I'm still skeptical about. Basically, he claims to only drink juice, that he does not eat, that he would chew food and spit it out and will suck on it. Of course, maybe he could be secretly eating when I'm not watching.
What type of food would you have?
We would take like apples and mangoes, bananas, some avocado, and just juice it into just something to drink. And we were doing the most intense workouts of my life, or some of my life, they only on that. And I was amazed that not only did I not really feel hungry, but I was performing at a pretty high level. So it was showing me, and like also he only sleeps maybe 4 or 5 hours a night. So it's like, and he's like twice my age and running circles around me.
I said you look healthier. I think it was a good week.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is like the mind-brain connection. I feel like I'm doing things like I've learned to swim better since then. Like I've actually been training that. I've been doing sauna and like ice baths and things like that, just all to try to reconnect with my, could say spirit or energy structure is how he would define it. But basically it's like the mind and body connection. It was a really powerful, profound experience for me. I think that I was highly skeptical even into the second day. And then by the third and the fourth day, I was coming around to like, wow, I've really underdeveloped part of my life, and really only thought of myself as this brain, and I need to become more unified as a person.
2 quick questions. One, do you mind disclosing the cost of this excursion?
Yeah, so it was, and I paid in crypto. So I have to do the conversion from Czech crowns too. I think it was about 7,000 for like for the 4 days. But the other part is we had to have an interpreter. He spoke a little German, and so, but like very little English. He's learning English, but there was kind of a lag, and I think it would be probably cheaper if you spoke Czech or Russian or Ukrainian, because it would just be direct. And so it wouldn't take that long. Whereas he would say something, the interpreter would tell me, I would tell them, and back. So that, yeah, I think it was about 7,000 US, but so it's like 28,000 Czech crowns, I think.
Okay, so one last question, sort of, well, 2 questions combined into one. One is, what did you do for recovery? Because whenever you're doing anything new, it's shocking to the body, and recovery is a challenge. So what did you do for recovery? And you had mentioned that they did a lot of cold exposure. Maybe that helps with recovery. Explain what the cold exposure regimen was.
So part of the training is really personalized to each person. And so when my friend did the training in the winter, they did a ton of cold exposure, partially because it's easier in the winter. So like he had to actually, like in January, sit outside in a cold tub, in just exposed in the Czech Republic, which gets cold. For me, there wasn't nearly as much of that just because it was the summer. We didn't have as many options. I've been doing a lot of it myself. Part of it connects like with the Wim Hof method where it does help with recovery, but it also helps you deal with cold and just makes your body more resilient. And there's like actually quite a bit of good scientific evidence behind that. But mine, because they knew that I was a poker player and I needed to focus on like getting into flow and getting into no mind states, my training was more about like, they would give me a stick, the assistant would run, and I would be running blindfolded barefoot and just have to like follow and also like feel with my body. And then like eventually they would get rid of the stick. And now I'm like walking alone through the woods, blindfolded, just feeling like trying to turn your body into a radar, feeling like where the path is. So my training was less about the cold exposure and more about the no mind states. But I think it's different based on every person. In terms of recovery, it was like drinking juice, and like we would go out, go swim early we'd bike hard to the lake, and they would yell at me for riding too slow. I would get into the lake, I'd have to swim blindfolded, then I was running blindfolded, doing things like this like primal yelling, because like they pointed out like very well-mannered, very repressed, show no emotion. And they're like, okay, we have to actually like get in touch with your masculine, like caveman energy a lot more. So we would do that. We would come back and then have a juice. There would be a lecture portion where we're talking about his philosophical approach to solving problems, to getting rid of like all of this just nasty programming that we have, and realizing that like everything that we think is a characteristic of ourselves is actually just a choice. And like we can always change choices. So then there would be that kind of philosophical schooling. And then in the afternoon, we would do these hardcore balancing training to the point where like your whole body is like shaking because of like how intense it is. And so I wouldn't say we did anything explicitly for recovery. We would do different stretches and postures that would help make sure you were not getting interested in help or getting injured, and also like reconnect with your body. One was like in yoga, they have a bridge pose. So we just like held it for 5 or 10 minutes to the point where like kind of everything is shaking. But then you almost feel this like buzzing sensation of like, oh, I actually like am feeling my body in a way that I wasn't before. So there really wasn't much recovery, to be honest. It was just intense the whole time.
Wow. I love it. I'll be curious to see if you end up going back. So I now have a time constraint because my daughter is coming over.
Okay.
But I hope we can do a part 2 one day. This was really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to.
All right. Well, have fun in Stockholm, and I will see you later.
All right. Thanks very much. Talk to you soon.